This is Demetria Spinrad.
And this is Isaac Meyer.
And you're listening to Criminal Records Podcast, a podcast about some of the weirdest cases in true crime history. And this year, I really feel like I want to start 2024 with a bang. I want to get on that grind set. I want to be a hustle culture bro. So, do you have someone who's really going to inspire me to live my most productive life?
I do. I definitely have someone who can start things off with a bang in a few different senses of that term, actually. And who definitely hustled pretty hard because this is going to be a two-parter. There's way too much to cover in one episode. We're going to be starting 2024 off with Emma Goldman, who is one of the most famous anarchists, I would say, in American history. Of course, a fairly famous Jewish American figure who managed to get kicked out of the United States and who somehow managed to have that be one of the least interesting things that happened to her. So today is going to be kind of, if I were making the film version, it would be Emma Goldman Origins. We're going to kind of get to her emergence as a figure in the anarchist movement, which does involve some brush-ups with the law. And then next week is going to be next time, I should say, will be Emma Goldman, the major anarchist figure. But first, of course, Demetria, we must begin with the historical background. So Emma Goldman's a Lithuanian Jew born in June of 1869. And so even though she grows up in what was Lithuania, when she's born, she's living under Russian rule. Lithuania had been absorbed into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and then when Poland got carved up by the powers of Europe, that chunk ended up on the Russian side of things. And of course, we all know Russia under the Tsars was a famously accepting place where ethnic minorities were treated extremely well, and everyone was very happy. And we all just loved the Tsar.
So she starts off in this place where I presume her family is going to get the hell out of.
Yeah, pretty quickly, it turns out. And for good reason, because Russia under the Tsars, sucked for a lot of reasons. Turns out there's a reason that people were not super peeved when they all got shot against a wall. But for Jews, Russia was really a bad place. Under Nicholas I and then the Tsar when Emma Goldman is born, Alexander II, there's this big push to try and limit the power of Jewish communities, because when Russia absorbed what had been Poland, Lithuania, there was a really large Jewish community there. That was one of the few areas where Jews were relatively tolerated. And so the Russians inherit this huge Jewish population, and they decide to deal with that by treating these people very shittily. They're confined to an area called the Pale of Settlement, which they are not allowed to leave without permits. Their sons, for example, are subject to really brutal conscription that sends them to the army for decades. The idea being that they would serve as cannon fodder, and the ones that survive would be taken away. They're taken away as like 10-year-olds. So the idea is that they become Russified. They lose their Jewish kind of character.
Yeah, fun story, actually. My dad was doing some family genealogy and found out that happened to an ancestor of mine.
And you can tell it really worked, right? Now you love the Tsar so much.
I just love the motherland so much, obviously. That's why I keep doing cases about communists arguing.
So this is obviously not a super chill and awesome time to be a Jew in Russia. It's also a period, though, of intense kind of division within Jewish communities, which I think is important for understanding a bit of what Goldman's coming out of. This is kind of the peak of what's called the Haskalah. I shouldn't call it the Haskalah. It's the peak of Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment. Which is when large numbers of Jews emancipated from the rule, or from ghettoization, are allowed to engage with kind of the liberal-minded ideas of European Enlightenment and kind of, wrestle with becoming modern Jews. I would say a lot of, if you've met any Jew who's at all assimilated, they're kind of a child of Haskalah, of this moment.
So I would imagine that the Tsar is not exactly wild about this group of folks who he has very badly oppressed and then are engaging with a lot of fascinating new liberal thought about the equality of man.
He definitely doesn't like that, but he hates these people, the next group of people, even more, which are left-wing revolutionary ideologues, who generally, in the Jewish community, get involved in like the socialist, the Marxist movement, often abandoning any like claim to Jewish identity or peoplehood, very about this kind of like all of these labels have to be rejected and instead build this classless Marxist society. And in Russia, of course, there's a communist movement, turns out, and
I've
also
heard
a
of it.
big, yeah, it comes up, and then a pretty large anarchist movement as well, which will be important for us going forward. And then finally, also, you have one more movement that's not too big at this point, will get big later, which is the Zionist movement, which is another form of kind of intellectual dissent that's happening at this time.
Hmm. So, folks who are against government, for different government, for going somewhere else to form a government.
Yes, and also some
Not
people who
not in that order.
just want to get out and move to America because it's chiller than Tsarist Russia, which is a low bar, but still.
Hmm.
So into this world is born on June 27th, 1869, one Emma Goldman, child of an Orthodox Jewish Lithuanian family. Her mom's name is Taube Binowitz. She'd previously been married, actually. Her first husband, whose name was Leon Zadokow, was a physician, and they apparently had been very happy. They had two daughters together, but he got tuberculosis and died in the mid 1860s. And so she had to remarry to a guy named Abraham Goldman from a moderately wealthy family, but apparently a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He wanted to go to yeshiva to become a rabbi, didn't make the cut, and took that a little personally. And so the family is contentious. The father apparently not, never really gets over this disappointment and is also very traditional, very religious, doesn't want to educate his daughters, believes actually in keeping them in line with violence. Her mother is way more of an assimilated, like more of a German Jew, very identifying with German culture because Germany's not that far from Lithuania and very assimilated. So the family is kind of divided from the jump. Emma is the middle child. She might have been the first kid of this second marriage. Her later recollections are a little unclear. But then the couple will have three more brothers, Louis, Herman, and Moishe or Morris Goldman. So it's a big family. So Emma Goldman is raised religious by her father, but her mother really wants the whole family to learn German and to be engaged in kind of the modern world, hires tutors to train the whole family in the German language. And so Emma kind of grows up divided between this more traditional Jewish world and this more kind of Western oriented liberal mindset.
And I do also want to ask, do we have any documentation of some of her feelings about? It sounds like her father was very traditionally Jewish in a time and place where that could be a very gendered thing, and it sounds like her mom's pushing back against that. Did she ever talk about that particular experience in her early life?
So she'll write an autobiography where she talks very frankly about all of this. It's much later in her life, and it's unclear. She herself says she doesn't remember some things clearly. You always have to be a little bit kind of skeptical when you're dealing with recollections that much later. But I think it's pretty clear there is like a stark division in the marriage. And, I wouldn't call it a happy marriage from the descriptions I've read. And that kind of brings out a rebellious streak. I think it's fair to say in Emma Goldman, she definitely had what you'd call a challenging relationship with her father. And you kind of see that projected in her early views on politics, too. She'll talk later about seeing a czarist official beating peasants for resisting orders, and that being a very formative thing. She'll talk about seeing conscription officials come to take Jewish sons off to go fight, and like the parents pleading and that not doing anything. And kind of becoming convinced that all this whole system is just kind of oppressive and opposed to human dignity as a concept, right? Kind of that being a factor in her worldview from a very early age. So then the family's going to jump around a little bit. When she's 7, they'll briefly move to Königsberg in East Prussia, what's now Kaliningrad, to attend, so she can attend a Jewish school. Well, the family eventually moves there for economic reasons. Doesn't go great. The school's kind of a mess. And so eventually she moves as a teenager with the family to St. Petersburg in Russia. Um, Abraham Goldman is able to get essentially a permit to move to the city for economic reasons because it's outside the pale of settlement. Jews are not allowed to live there without special permission, but they get it. She's eventually allowed to relocate to St. Petersburg. And it's a contentious time for her. By this point, she's about 15, and her father is pushing her to drop out of school and get married. She is not super keen on this. It's also a complicated moment in Russian history because she gets there just a little bit before the events of March 1881.
Yeah, I was about to say, if I'm remembering my Russian timeline correctly, this is quite a time to be a teenager in St. Petersburg.
Absolutely. So if you don't know what we're talking about, on March 13th, 1881, the Tsar himself, Alexander II, is on his way back from the Mikhailovsky Manege, which is a cavalry ground. He watches maneuvers there every Sunday and then goes back to the Winter Palace. There's one of two routes he can take. He takes the one along the Catherine Canal around 2 p.m. And as he's going along the canal, a man with a bomb hucks an explosive at his carriage. And actually, the carriage is bulletproof. It's not damaged, but it kills one of his bodyguards, and he gets out to check on the bodyguard. And then another bomber throws a bomb at him, badly injuring him. The Tsar is dead in an hour. At the last of several extremely elaborate attempts to kill Alexander II, which are
Yeah,
probably going to be an episode one day.
wasn't this the guy who survived like 7 assassination attempts or something?
I know there were quite a few. I could not give you a precise number.
I mean, okay, in fairness, the more I learn about the Romanovs, the more I think, you know what? If I was living under the Romanovs, I might take a couple shots at them too if
Yeah,
they happened to be nearby before they, had me beaten for wearing the wrong coat or something.
yeah. I mean, not a great government. Again, I really have to stress this. So the assassination, eventually successful assassination of Alexander, is carried out by an anarchist group, essentially a group called Narodnaya Volya, or the People's Will. There are 10 assassins involved in the plot. 3 of them are women. One of those women is Jewish. And they're part of this kind of growing, broadly anarchistic movement. A lot of people would call them nihilists. That's more of like a pejorative, just calling them extreme anarchists, but it is true the politics of the anarchist movement in Russia are a little complex. Now, I want to state here, by the way, I'm not an anarchist. Last I checked, Dimitri is not either. Or maybe, I don't know.
Hey man, I know I've been hiding it really well, but I'm actually planning an anarchist plot to destroy the Tsar. I'm a little late.
There's a few Romanovs, I think, still wandering around somewhere you can get. So I'm going to do my best to do justice to the complexities of anarchist thought for any of the anarchists who might be listening, but I am not an expert on this subject at all. So I'm trying here. I'm gonna try. Anyway, uh, Alexander's death is like a big shock to the Jewish community. He had been a liberal who reformed some of the anti-Jewish laws early in his life, and then kind of started swinging back around later in his life, and had like liberalized some of the settlement rules, for example, making it easier for families like the Goldmans to come to St. Petersburg. And so, for example, her mom, she would later recall, was very upset when Alexander gets assassinated. But Emma Goldman kind of sympathizes with the assassination attempt, especially because afterwards there's this big right wing swing in Russia. The government really claps down on any kind of dissent. A lot of the reforms benefiting Jews are walked back. And there's just this general, like, real suppression of dissent, this clamping down that happens afterwards that really starts to push Goldman more into a radical position. She's also really inspired by the hashtag girl bosses who are involved in the assassination attempt. And apparently, I found out, got her first bits of revolutionary literature from her sister, Helene, her older sister, who's a little bit older and is involved in the student underground, and kind of passes along her younger sister, hey, here's some cool stuff to read. Um, I do want to note, actually, that she around this point for the first time will read the novel "What Is to Be Done" by Nikolai Chernyshevsky. This is a pretty famous work of Russian anarchism. The plot is about a daughter of a gentry family named Vera who rebels against this, being put into this very traditional get married, pump out kids thing, and ends up in a weird throuple with her husband and her best friend. And I note that only because it might be relevant later.
Oh boy, now that is some fascinating foreshadowing. I guess this wouldn't be the first criminal throuple we've covered on this podcast, and it probably won't be the last either.
It's going to be more than a throuple. So Goldman does not end up joining the revolutionary movement in Russia because by the time she's an adult, it's really been clamped down on and won't come back really until the Russo-Japanese War about 2 decades later. But she started to get kind of politically radicalized. And around this time, her favorite sister, Helene, says, "Hey, I think it's time to get out of Russia." Big mood.
You know what? Yeah, smart thinking there.
I hear about this place, where this land of opportunity called, let me get this right, New York. I think that's how you say it. And so Helene says, "I'm going to move to New York to be with some distant relatives who are already there." And Emma says, "Yeah, you know what? I'm down. Let's go." Her father tries to keep her from going, actually. And then she threatens to jump into the Neva River if he won't let her go. And so he's like, "Fine, go to America, see if I care."
Definitely a functional family relationship going on there.
Really cool and normal parenting. So Emma Goldman arrives in America on December 29th, 1885, and relocates, of course, to the great metropolis of New York at the time. Not New York City, but another fabulous city. Where do you think that might be, Demetria?
You're looking at me
Of
in
course
such a
it's
way that
Rochester.
oh
Of
my
course it's
god,
Rochester,
yeah.
New York.
You're gonna pull that I'm from New York thing, aren't you? Yeah.
The joke for those non-Americans is that Rochester is basically nothing now. I grew up in New York and I had to look up and double check where Rochester is just to make sure I had it right. It's on the shores of Lake Ontario in the northwestern part of the state, if you're wondering. And it was a bigger city back when the Great Lakes were more important to American transport, when shipping on them was a big deal. It still is, but not as big as it used to be. Uh, it's got a small Jewish community at the time, mostly a German Jewish community that's more assimilated, and then waves of Eastern European Jews who've come to the city looking for work and usually end up working for the German Jews, who are a little more connected because they're more assimilated.
So this is what, the 1880s now?
It's 1885, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I would imagine putting myself in the shoes of a bright young anarchist who has just come to the big city, or I guess the very small city compared to the city she just left. America's going to have some problems, different problems, new problems, exciting new problems, but it's going to have some problems.
Absolutely. And she gets there pretty much just in time for one of the biggest moments of labor dispute in American history. And this is, if the Russia experience had started radicalizing her, what pushes Emma fully into the left. And I'm talking, of course, about almost certain future episode of the Haymarket riots. So, here's the deal. America, 1880s, turns out not great. Economy's growing really well, industrialization's continuing, but there's also soaring wealth inequality, so not at all reminiscent of anything recent. Also, a big wave of immigration, mostly Catholics and Jews into a up until this point mostly Protestant country. And so there's really intense tension between unions and employers, but also between unions and immigrants because the unions are often dominated by protectionist waspy types. And one of the many ways in which this moment of intense, ferment, I suppose, comes out is the Haymarket riots. So in 1886, the American Federation of Labor sets May Day, May 1st, as the target date to implement a crazy new innovation for the working man. What do you think that was, Demetria?
Listening to underground punk shows, if my May Day experience has been anything like the past.
Close. It's implementing the 8-hour workday. This radical new idea.
8-hour workdays. What are they going to ask for next? Lunch breaks?
I know, it's ridiculous. So Chicago, which is a city that's home to a lot of union organizing, is especially tense in the lead up to May 1st because there is this expectation there's going to be mass strikes, violence between the unions and the employers. And in February, in the lead up, there's a big dispute at a harvester company, the McCormick Harvester Company, over the firing of several workers who are organizing for the union. There's then a lockout, and the workers respond by calling a strike. You'll never guess who gets called in to help deal with the strike breaking. It is, of course, the Pinkertons.
Oh, okay. We have to do a couple episodes about the Pinkertons soon because I feel like my fascination with William Pinkerton has led to an incorrectly soft view of the
Oh,
Pinkertons on this show.
we're gonna help
We,
fix
oh
that this
yeah,
episode.
okay, yeah. Let's get into it because there is a reason that the Pinkertons have gone down in history as I would say one of like the nation's biggest villains. I
So
should
the
say,
Pinkertons.
okay, technically, I guess they are still active and less engaged in villainy than they were in the 1800s. They are still despised, like the name Pinkerton is still despised in very large swaths of the country for this reason.
My understanding is they do less union busting than they used to, which is good. Keep
Mhm.
that up. So the Pinkertons are called in here, but actually, in a moment of remarkable restraint, there's not really any violence, just some protest as the plant reopens. But then on May 3rd, there's fighting between the strikers and scabs brought in by the company, replacement workers, and nearby cops, and some of the Pinkertons. One of the strikers is killed, an unknown number are injured. And so for the next day, a meeting is called in Haymarket Square in Chicago for the evening of May 4th to protest the actions by the police, with a bunch of speakers holding a rally condemning what the police have done, all that. Chicago's mayor at the time is actually at this action and tells the cops, hey, like, it's a little testy in there, but it should be fine. It's peaceful. No action is necessary. So, of course, what do you think the cops do?
Oh boy, I think the cops came out prepared for a fight, and I think they're going to get the fight they were looking for. I mean, you don't bring the Pinkertons in unless you're expecting a fight.
Of course, exactly. The cops show up anyway. They try and disperse the meeting forcibly. And at some point during that, someone in the crowd throws a bomb at those cops, killing 7 of them. At which point, the cops pull out their guns and start shooting indiscriminately into the crowd.
Wait, someone was just carrying around a bomb just in case? Like, this is
Yeah,
just my walking around bomb?
so it is not clear who threw the Haymarket bomb, and there have been wild theories ever since. Maybe it was an anarchist. Maybe it was a cop, a plant by the cops. Right? Nobody knows. I mean, but of course, immediately there's this witch hunt afterwards because the assumption is these anarchist agitators are, attacking our way of life. They're killing cops in the streets, all that, tied up in a lot of red baiting, kind of concern about communist revolutionaries, and just general xenophobia. All the immigrants are secret members of subversive societies, come to undermine America with their crazy European ideas.
And to think they didn't even have Twitter yet.
Right? I mean, some things never change. So the Chicago cops go a little crazy. They mass arrest a bunch of people and try and piece together a conspiracy case that all of this was a conspiracy to kill cops. Probably, almost certainly, I should say, torturing some of their witnesses in the process. In the end, 8 men are put on trial for the Haymarket bombing. Only 2 of them, I really have to note, were actually at Haymarket Square on May 4th. The prosecutors don't even actually try to prove who, if any of them, threw a bomb at the police. Basically, it's all just like these people are revolutionaries and therefore they're responsible for Haymarket. And 4 of the 8 of them are hanged. So, really cool, normal trial that went super well.
Ah, the criminal justice system truly working its magic.
And so Emma Goldman is following all of this using an old timey invention called a newspaper, which some of our younger listeners may need to look up what that is. But it's quite fascinating. That was how people got their news before Twitter, or I should say before television, and then that was replaced by Twitter.
Although, okay, I will have to say, if you do digging through old newspapers, they sure don't look like the New York Times today. There's a lot more hot takes, a lot more articles about who wore what when and who's in town.
Yeah, old timey papers were not as concerned with being respectable, which I think made them more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly not as good for democracy, though. So Emma Goldman's following all of this very closely, and she starts getting involved in the Rochester socialist movement with her sister as a result. And then, according to her, it's when the Haymarket defendants are executed on November 11th, 1887. That's when she becomes an anarchist. That's like the galvanizing moment.
I mean, okay, in fairness, I'm putting myself in the shoes of this young woman here who has just escaped an incredibly oppressive country. and has just watched a pretty horrific right wing crackdown in that country, has come to a new country, immediately witnessed another crackdown in this new country, is probably starting to feel like maybe the problem can't be solved by moving countries again.
Yeah, I would say the vibes are not great. But before she can get full into anarchist mode, she does have to deal with one trifling issue, which is that she is technically married at this point.
Oh, wait, a little detail you overlooked there.
I was going to come back around to it. All right. I'm doing some setup. So, she obviously you can't make a job of reading the papers. So when she comes to Rochester, she starts working in a garment factory, and there she meets a nice young Jewish boy, a tailor by the name of Jacob Kirsner, who she will end up marrying in large part, from what we can tell, to escape her parents because they moved to Rochester in half a year because they're fleeing the anti-Semitism in Russia. And so she may well have married this guy just to be like, I need some separation from my parents.
I gotta say, throwing yourself in the Hudson is just not as romantic as throwing yourself in the Neva.
It is true. I did a lot more garbage in the Hudson River. I actually haven't been to St. Petersburg. Maybe that's not true. Um. Anyway, apparently it's not a great marriage. The way she will later describe Jacob Kirsner, we do only have her description, is that he is both impotent, literally impotent, and an obsessive gambler, and tries to force her out of the workforce because he feels disgraced that she has a job. So really just not a super great husband. She decides to divorce him a little under a year on. He threatens to commit suicide. So she comes back for a time, but then eventually does end up divorcing him a little bit before the Haymarket executions. I also want to point out Jacob Kirsner will eventually end up going to prison for larceny himself and end up living pretty anonymously in Chicago. So, not a great marriage, generally speaking, but it will be important next week. So, I want to make sure I note it here.
Okay. All right. I'm putting a pin in that.
Okay. So, she's divorced. She's now an anarchist. Of course, the natural place to go is New York, right? Eventually, she'll end up moving to New York City in 1889 as she's kind of winding down her marriage, dealing with all that. She'll relocate to the city in August of 1889, specifically to the Lower East Side, which is the home at this point of a good chunk of the Jewish community. When we talked a year or so back about the kosher meat riots, the Lower East Side is part of that, of course. It's a big, big center for that. And so she decides she's going to move to the Jewish community, and she's going to start trying to organize the Jews of New York into the anarchist movement.
All right. If Jews are famous for one thing, it's being easy to organize.
And I mean, anarchism, famously a very kind of coherent ideology in terms of the different factions, so should go great. Speaking of which, we should briefly talk about the different flavors of anarchism. And again, I'm going to do my best here to get through this quickly and clearly. I am not going to teach Anarchism 101 here. So, anarchism begins to emerge as a distinct movement in Europe in the mid 1800s. Basically, it splits off from the Marxist movement, specifically people who follow a French thinker named Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, as well as Mikhail Bakunin. These early anarchists don't like capitalism, so they have that kind of in common with the Marxists. But they also don't want a centralized revolution. They want small, militant, autonomous groups that are trying to destroy the state, not seize control of the state. They're very into this idea of what's called the propaganda of the deed, essentially that you engage in these very kind of like violent actions against the government or against society as a way to kind of spread the message, right? People hear about, oh, you assassinated the czar. What's that all about? And then they read about anarchism and they're like, yes, that's cool. Right? That's the idea. Bakunin especially is a big influence on this. He's very opposed to any kind of rigid like anarchist system, very much an action for action's sake kind of dude who is very into like, we're just gonna organize to do all these violent actions, overthrow the state. Afterwards, the people will just kind of figure it out. In the mid 1800s, there's a newer strain of anarchism that's also starting to emerge that's associated with a guy called Peter Kropotkin. Less of a tear it down approach here. Kropotkinite anarchism is about enabling autonomous, self-governing communes that confederate together for mutual aid. Broadleaf out of this assumption that humans are cooperative, especially with the folks immediately around them, and that naturally they will kind of form themselves into functional communes that can operate together. And really, it's the state imposed and supported structures that pit us against each other rather than leading us to work together. So Goldman is politically more of a Kropotkinite, more of this approach. She says she has a fondness for Bakunin, but mostly she just likes him more than she likes Marx. She calls Marx hopelessly middle class, which apparently I guess is bad.
Oh, damn. That's a real burn on Marx.
So,
damn, girl, your class consciousness is on point.
Like the tier list is Kropotkin, then Bakunin, then Marx.
I'm sorry. It is really, that's the funniest possible insult you could come up with for Karl Marx.
Tragically, I do think he was dead by the time she said it, because I would love to know how he reacted to such a sick burn.
Oh my God. Okay. Oh, okay.
So this is kind of the world into which Goldman is entering. And of course, it doesn't take her that long, because there are a good number of lefty Jews in America, it turns out, to meet a few other Jewish anarchists, most notably a guy named Alexander Berkman. And through Berkman, she'll be introduced to one of the biggest anarchists of this period in American history, who's not Jewish, he's German. His name is Johann Most. He is more of this like radical Bakuninite type, big proponent in his written work of the propaganda of the deed, and the editor of a major anarchist journal called Freiheit, or Freedom. He'd actually been a member of the Socialist Party in Germany, but had to flee the country in 1878. And then he moved to the UK, got imprisoned there for writing an article in favor of assassinating Alexander II. Turns out British, also a monarchy, didn't love that. And so then he comes to the US.
Okay, well, if there's one thing the US does have going for it, not a lot of monarchs.
That's true. You know, one of the things you can say about the US, we don't go for that kind of nonsense. We just go for, I don't know, weird people who wish they were monarchs instead. So the way Goldman will later tell it, she goes with Berkman to hear Most speak. Afterwards, Berkman arranges an introduction, and Most is really impressed by Goldman and says, I want to make you like a speaker, take you under my wing, and make you kind of a figurehead for the anarchist movement. I think you'll be very good as a face of the movement. And Most's whole shtick will have a big influence on her speaking style. She'll be famous for being kind of very combative, with a lot of aggressive rhetoric, very sarcastic, which was very his style. Ideologically, there's a bit of a gap between them. She'd later complain that Most being very obsessed with violence would hurt the anarchist movement. And she'll also break with him in a big way on unions. She's very pro-union, pro-labor organizing, and he sees that as a distraction from the revolution. Also, apparently, Johann Most, shockingly for anyone involved in left-wing politics, is kind of a dick personally. Alice Wexler, who wrote a great biography of Emma Goldman, described him as, quote, an autocrat, vain, theatrical, domineering, short-tempered, intolerant of difference, given to fierce rages and smoldering resentments. Apparently, he's very conservative on issues of gender and sex, and tries to basically, like, convince Emma Goldman partway through their relationship to marry him and become his housewife.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I just looked up some pictures of young Emma Goldman, and yeah, I definitely see how she would be a very appealing face of a movement, but I might be a little bit suspicious of any older man who tries to take this young babe under his wing and say, oh, you're the special one, I'm going to train you up.
Yeah, it turns out, good suspicion. On the other hand, Alex Berkman, very different relationship with Emma Goldman. So Alex Berkman, who she would call Sasha to nickname, will have a much longer term influence. He is also Jewish, grew up in Lithuania, but eventually moved to St. Petersburg with his family, who are very assimilated and very middle class. His uncle, however, is a big figure in the revolutionary underground. His name is Maxim Natanson, and apparently he's pretty famous in the history of the Socialist Revolutionary Party. And he gets shipped off to Siberia when Alex Berkman is 11, and part of the crackdown after the assassination of Alexander II.
There was a lot of that going around at the time.
So after this point, the family loses their residency rights, the Berkmans, in St. Petersburg. And shortly thereafter, Berkman will become an atheist. He will embrace leftism. He'll get kicked out of his family home for doing these things and be like, fuck it, I'm going to America.
Okay, I'm loving this group of young folks of Jewish ancestry who are just like, fuck this entire situation, goodbye. I'm going to the one I'm going somewhere where there are no kings.
So Berkman will also say he's a big fan of the novel What Is to Be Done. His favorite character is a guy named Rakhmatov, who is this extremist revolutionary who just shows up to be kind of revolutionary and cool. But Berkman will later say of being a revolutionary, and this is important, a revolutionary is a being who has neither personal interests nor desires above the necessities of the cause, one who has emancipated himself from being merely human and has risen above that, even to the height of conviction which excludes all doubt, all regret. In short, one who in the very inmost of his soul feels himself revolutionist first and human afterward.
Oh boy, that is some thinking that could lead you down some really risky paths as a
We'll,
social reformer.
we'll get there. Emma Goldman really likes Berkman. Apparently, she is annoyed by him on occasion and his kind of very intense, interest in the cause, but also really respects how seriously he believes in it. And he's a very educated man. He's read a lot of theory. Do you even read theory? He's read theory. And so really like cares about his opinion, really wants, admires the relationship that they have together. And he appears to have shared that. He really, respected her. What Alice Wexler says is that he admired her energy, courage, and loyalty, not only to the radical movement, but also to himself. And of course, that means they get down to it. They get
Mm-hmm.
to it.
I
And
mean,
shocking.
once you've rejected God and society, I mean, you might as well get down to it.
So they get freaky pretty quickly. They're not married, shockingly. I know.
I mean,
And
marriage is just a societal affectation, sir.
Speaking of societal affectations, very shortly they will move in with two people. One of them is Modest Stein, also known by his nickname Fedya Stein, who is Alex Berkman's cousin, and with whom Emma Goldman almost certainly starts having sex, as well, with Alex Berkman's knowledge and approval.
All right, I'm kind of digging this. Well, I was gonna say cool, chill polycule. I guess they're not very chill people in general, but you know what?
We're
Being
about to talk about the Homestead strike. They are not chill.
Look, okay, I live in Seattle. Being lectured about anarchism by a polycule is like an average Saturday night for me. Like, I've been there. I've done that.
Also, there's one other person in this household whose name is Helen Minkin. As far as I can tell, they didn't have sex, Emma Goldman and Helen Minkin, but Goldman probably was bisexual. We do have some evidence that she had relations with women later in her life, just not with Helen Minkin, who she apparently hated because Minkin was a big fan of Johann Most, and apparently Most and Minkin would get married down the line. And so for that reason, there's some bad blood there.
Oh, yet again, leftist theory destroys another polycule.
Yeah, it's a tragedy as old as time itself. So yeah, Emma Goldman, as you probably are getting a knack for here, is notorious at this point and later in her career for her free love beliefs. We're going to link in the show notes her 1914 essay, Marriage and Love, which go really into this in pretty substantial depth. But basically, the short version is she says marriage is an economic arrangement and has nothing to do with love. Love is the ultimate expression of free will and therefore cannot be chained or restrained or focused on one person. And so you got to love freely and bone your boyfriend's cousin and just, be into it.
I was with you right up until the end there.
So this happy little polycule is going in New York until 1892, when they then moved to Massachusetts for some reason. I believe Stein was working there, and then the other two followed him eventually. And I love this detail. They tried to make a textile shop, it didn't work, and then they tried to make an ice cream shop. Is the next Yeah,
A radical anarchist ice cream shop.
run by an anarchist polycule. Yes.
Honestly, you know what? That is I know a lot of anarchists for whom that probably is the dream. So okay. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that, but I cannot imagine this group is very successful at business.
They definitely did not do a great job running this ice cream shop due to the usual challenges of running it, but also something totally unrelated. It's time to pivot and talk about another labor issue, the homestead strike. So, that means talking about Andrew Carnegie, the self made man who clawed his way to the top of the American steel industry on the top of what? Only a few thousand bodies. So,
Look, the trains have got to get built somehow.
so Carnegie is by this point stupid wealthy because he basically runs the American steel industry. Steel's kind of important for industrializing, turns out. And one of his major plants is in Homestead, Pennsylvania, which in June of 1892 is experiencing some labor issues. The union representing the plant workers is in talks to collectively bargain, get a contract. Talks break down. There's a lockout. It's a whole thing. The manager of the plant is a guy named Henry Clay Frick, who might be. We've talked about some pretty shitty people in this show, so like, I have a hard time saying he's one of the worst, but certainly if we're doing like a list of big time criminal records villains, he'd be on there. Like, he's pretty awful. So Frick is famously anti-union. One of the big things he's famous for before this is helping to fund a private sports club in Pennsylvania for rich people, which then dammed a nearby private lake or a river to form a private lake that they could all enjoy. But they skimped on the dam, which then burst in 1889 and killed 2,000 people
Good
when the dam collapsed.
Lord. 2,000 people?
2,209 to be specific.
Oh my God. I mean, I know that this was an age of somewhat looser regulations, but that's a high body count.
And that's not the thing Henry Clay Frick is famous for being an asshole about, mind you. It's just one of the things he did before that.
Wait, that was just an appetizer? That was just an amuse-bouche for what the kind of atrocities he's about to unleash?
Oh, yeah. And of course, speaking of which, so Frick is anti union. He's like, I'm going to crush the union at Homestead. Who do you think he hires to crush the union at Homestead, Demetria?
Is it the Pinkertons?
You're goddamn right, it's the Pinkertons. He brings in the Pinkertons to forcibly break the union blockade around the plant and also to clear the workers out of company housing, literally ordering them to throw pregnant women out on the street in the process.
And just to be clear here, the Pinkertons, I think sometimes people get a little bit confused because they styled themselves as a private detective agency. They're basically just a private army that you can hire to do shit like this. They aren't cops, like they aren't legally law enforcement officers being employed by the government. They're kind of a private army.
They're very well armed security guards with not a lot of morals during this period.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume, I would hope that they operate differently now, but that was the way they operated in this period.
Well, I haven't heard of any large-scale gun battles between them and Union members, and that happened from July 5th to July 6th over that night. So, that's good. The Pinkertons, though, actually lost that gun battle. They tried to do a surprise boat landing behind the Union, but those Union people, there were a lot of them, and they spotted the boats and jumped the landing site. But then the state militia gets called in to forcibly clear the Union and reopen the plant after this gun battle between the Pinkertons and the Union. And I just wanted to note at this point, Henry Clay Frick, we'll talk about when he dies next week. But just coincidentally, if you're really feeling the rage at this, I want to note that he is buried in the Homewood Cemetery in Pittsburgh in Section 14, if anyone ever needs a public toilet in the city of Pittsburgh. Just to note that. Anyway, Henry Clay Frick, all the stuff he's doing is all over the news, and Goldman and Berkman especially are following this, and they are pissed. Goldman would later recall that to us, Homestead, sounded like the awakening of the American worker, the long-awaited day of his resurrection. We saturated ourselves with the events in Homestead to the exclusion of everything else. And so even before this big gun battle and then the state militia coming in, the pair had been planning to go to Homestead to kind of try and organize them to be anarchists, to try and kind of convince them to carry this specific momentum around the strike into support of the anarchist movement. But then after the gun battle, Alex Berkman decides that he is going to assassinate Henry Clay Frick. He's going to do a little propaganda of the deed all over this guy's face.
Okay, so this group of polyamorous ice cream shop owners is going straight to murder.
So here's the thing. It is unclear how involved Emma Goldman is about this. In the aftermath, for the obvious reasons and a few others, she's pretty cagey about how much she did or didn't know. The police will definitely try to prove that she's involved. Her home/ice cream shop will get raided by the cops in Massachusetts. Berkman will be pressed on it, though he'll never admit anything. Um, in her autobiography, 40 years later, Goldman will say that she was involved and actually taught Berkman how to throw bombs as part of the assassination plot, but was kind of ambivalent on the idea of killing people. In her private correspondence, she would always insist that she wasn't involved. So it's unclear how involved she is. Berkman got some stuff going on.
A lady never reveals her assassination plots.
So Berkman's plan is to sneak his way in, shoot this guy or stab him, depending on it, and then blow himself up with a nitroglycerin cartridge to avoid prison. And I just want to include a couple of quotes he would later offer about this. The killing of a tyrant is in no way to be considered as the taking of a life. To remove a tyrant is an act of liberation, the giving of life and opportunity to an oppressed people. And then he'll later say, it is impossible to confound law with right. They are opposites. The law is immoral. It is the conspiracy of rulers and priests against the workers to continue their subjugation. To be law-abiding means to acquiesce, if not directly participate in the conspiracy. A revolutionist is the truly moral man. To him, the interests of humanity are supreme. To advance them is his sole aim in life. Government with its laws is the common enemy. All weapons are justifiable in the noble struggle of the people against this terrible curse.
Let me see if I've got this right. So you have these two very clear sides who are quite literally duking it out. And he just wants to kind of walk into the middle of this conflict, shoot the guy that he believes is most responsible for this, blow himself up, and then everyone is going to just be able to reconstruct afterwards from his writings that this was an anarchist act.
Yeah.
Okay, great plan. How does that go for him?
About as well as you would expect. He is able to sneak in to Frick's office by pretending to be part of an employment agency for hiring strikebreakers, actually. And then shoots him. When that doesn't kill Frick, he pulls out a knife and stabs Frick. But then before he can finish the stabbing and blowing himself up, the union members hear this going on in Frick's office, and they rush in and grab Berkman and are like, "What are you doing?" and pin him down.
Oh, betrayed by his own comrades.
So, and Henry Clay Frick does not die. This actually crushes the Homestead movement completely because it turns people radically against it. The assassination is pretty universally condemned, and Alex Berkman will have a breakdown when he is in prison, especially because his trial is pretty quick, turns out, and he is sentenced to 22 years in prison, which is well past the usual maximum for the charge, aggravated manslaughter. But yeah, he gets
wait, it's not manslaughter. He didn't die.
Or attempted manslaughter, excuse me. So yeah, it's normally a maximum of 7. He gets 22 for extenuating circumstances.
In fairness, those circumstances were pretty extenuating.
So, this is a big moment for Goldman. Obviously, she gets a lot of scrutiny for being involved with Berkman. Again, her home is raided. She actually has to live in a brothel for a little while because her home is cordoned off as a crime scene. And obviously, she is very publicly, defensive of Berkman. Gets into another big thing with Johann Most, who accuses Berkman of being a patsy for Frick, who was paid to fake this assassination and stir up anti-anarchist sentiment. When that happens, Emma Goldman publishes an open letter, says basically, "Where's your proof?" When he doesn't offer any proof, she waits for him at one of his lectures, storms the stage with a horsewhip, and demands the proof. He is then dismissive, like, fuck off. And so she beats the shit out of him with the whip and then breaks the whip over her knee and throws the pieces at him and then is forced out of the building.
Damn, girl. Okay, I understand that tensions are quite high at this moment, but it seems like the movement's turning on itself fast.
It's a beautiful moment, really. Real high end discourse. So Homestead, not the greatest start to a career, but it makes Emma Goldman into a major figure of the anarchist movement. And from here on, we're not going to trace her career directly because there's a lot, and we just wouldn't. It would be like 4 episodes on Emma Goldman. Suffice it to say, she is in the hashtag discourse by this point. She is active in the discourse. And especially, she's big in the anarchist movement by 1893, which is important because that's the year of a major industrial and financial panic in the American economy. We don't need to get into why. Basically, high commodity prices, lack of oversight of the economy, bankrupts a bunch of industries, bubble economies, fun times. Upshot of all this, the unemployment rate in the U.S. spikes up to 3 million people by the end of December 1894, really particularly affecting blue-collar and factory workers, especially immigrants, like Lower East Side Jews, Emma Goldman's whole crowd.
Yeah, so they don't actually cover that particular economic depression much in schools, but it was an insane unemployment rate.
Yeah, it was a really bad, apparently this big asset bubble in investments in the West that then, when this all goes down, collapses and tanks the whole economy.
Mm-hmm. I think actually we talked a bit about some of that in one of our very recent episodes about a certain somebody who destroyed Montana's farmland.
It's all part of the Criminal Records cinematic universe.
Yeah, some really dumb choices were made on a very large scale. And I can't imagine that this is giving our anarchist any more confidence in the system that she lives under.
Not really, especially because of what comes next. So she is involved in organizing relief efforts like soup kitchens by July of 1893, and then in August, things get real spicy. We're going to do a bit of a breakdown day by day as we go towards the moment of truth. August 17th, there's a big anarchist meeting at Walhalia Hall in the Lower East Side that turns into a riot, right? Anarchist agitation around the economic depression. Goldman is not present, but there's a lot of very frantic press coverage of this event. The next day, August 18th, Emma Goldman is speaking at a neighboring hall, Golden Rule Hall, speaking in German, and according to the New York Times, what she says is, if you are hungry and need bread, go and get it. The shops are plentiful and the doors are open. So, she's agitating. The next day, there's a demonstration on Saturday, August 19th by the Jewish Clothing Workers Union because somehow they're violating Shabbos in Union Square. Sunday, on August 20th, union delegates representing 100,000 workers meet at the International Labor Exchange to lobby the state for relief for the unemployed, and Goldman is present at this too, and speaking very inflammatorily, very forward in the press coverage, because she's kind of well known as an anarchist speaker. All of which leads up to Monday, August 21st, when there's a hunger strike in Union Square, accompanied by an anarchist rally, with 3,000 people there, Goldman speaking last. And she's met by raucous cheers, and according to the press coverage, she tells the listeners to take everything by force. She'll later say she was telling them to march to the homes of the wealthy and demand food from them, not from the state government. And she'll later quote herself as saying, ask for work. If they do not give you work, ask for bread. If they do not give you work or bread, take bread. That's pretty standard for the rhetoric of this moment. It's not unusual, but Goldman is a better speaker than all the other people involved, and so she gets, again, a lot more attention and coverage. The New York Times, for example, has a headline afterwards. The workers, are a mild lot there. Even raindrops put them to flight. Businessmen of the district are disgusted with the goings-on of the unwashed and how they've been magnified. The danger is in leaving persons of the Emma Goldman type at large.
Oh my, there's a lot of very complicated class and ethnic tension going into the Emma Goldman type.
Oh, yeah. So the head of the NYPD threatens to have her arrested if she continues giving speeches. She does, shockingly. And so a warrant is put out for her arrest for inciting to riot, despite the fact that there was no riot on Monday, August 21st. She's arrested in Pennsylvania while setting up for a speech on August 30th, extradited to New York, and indicted on September 5th for her first trial. It will not be the last. So Emma Goldman's very savvy by this point. She knows how to work the press. She'll actually give an interview to Nellie Bly, who's one of the most famous journalists ever, one of the first investigative reporters for the New York World. She did this really interesting thing that made her famous. She got committed to a mental hospital and then wrote about that experience as like a scoop piece that was very sensational in its day. And Goldman apparently really impresses Bly, who writes up this whole interview, basically just giving Goldman a platform to talk about her views. She calls it the quote, the war of the masses against the classes. And kind of talking through her ideas about the exploitation of labor. This does huge numbers. It's really popular. And Bly's paper, the New York World, essentially offers Goldman, like, we'll publish anything you want in the lead up to the trial as a result, because it sells. So she's good at working the press. She's not as good at not getting convicted, but that's not that shocking. Her trial starts on October 4th. She is convicted on October 9th of incitement to riot very quickly. It's not a well put together trial in any sense of the word. I think it's fair to say. Again, there's no riot, despite the charge being incitement to riot. Basically, she's just convicted of saying anarchisty things. But she's sentenced on October 18th to 1 year on Island Penitentiary in Roosevelt Island and stays there until August 17th, 1894. Her release again makes her a celebrity. She's actually greeted by 2,800 people in a rally who are waiting for her when she's released. And it makes her kind of the face of the anarchist movement. She'll later say it's the turning point where she starts seeing herself through her own eyes as an anarchist thinker, not through the eyes of the men in her life. Like, they view me as an anarchist so I could be an important thinker, but I see myself as having that role.
So she really could be someone who coalesces a movement around her. And anarchists are famously not great at getting movements to coalesce around them. So this actually could be a pretty substantial threat to law and order.
Absolutely. And she's very good at kind of working across what we would call intersectional identity lines today. Basically, not just appealing to anarchist interests, but talking about like early feminist ones too. So actually, I have part of her speech when she's released. Friends and comrades, I have come back to you after having served 10 months in prison for talking. If the representatives of your government intend to prosecute women for talking, they will have to begin with their mothers, wives, sisters, and sweethearts, for they will never stop women from talking. Applause line. But it was not Emma Goldman who was prosecuted. It was the thoughts of Emma Goldman, the principle of anarchy, that were prosecuted. The views held by thousands of brave men and women who have died and who are ready to die. It is the right of free speech that was prosecuted at the Court of General Sessions, not little Emma Goldman. So she really knows how to kind of work a crowd and kind of be like, even if you're not an anarchist, you should care about free speech, right? Mm-hmm. Or you care about the rights of women.
So I'm trying to remember this era of feminist history exactly. I mean, like, this is a pretty rowdy era of feminist history, right? Like this.
Oh yeah,
is this kind of the height of the suffragette bombings, or is that a little after that?
That's a little bit later, but the height of radical suffragism is not that far away. We're not that far from a suffragette trying to blow up the Stone of Scone.
Speaking of the criminal record cinematic universe, but yeah, she may not actually be as fringe back then as she appears to us now. Like, she could actually slot pretty neatly into some things that are already going on.
And then one thing we'll see next week is she is pretty good at like making common cause with more moderate liberals too, in addition to being able to speak to that kind of more like radical progressive movement. But that's it for part 1, Emma Goldman origins. She has originated. We have attained the rise of Emma Goldman. And the next time we all sit down to chat, it's going to be Emma Goldman, the rock star, her kind of height as an anarchist thinker, and then how she gets booted out of America.
I am so excited. This is such a fascinating historical figure.
But in the meantime, if anyone would like to reach out to us to suggest ideas for other things that any anarchist polyamorous couples we know can do, other than ice cream shops, pizza parlor is pizza parlor too similar?
Actually, there is a proletariat pizza in Seattle, so I think the communists have that on lock.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, the anarchists need a different shtick. Noodle like a noodle joint maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like, the anarchist coffee shop's always a classic.
That is true. So if you would like to help us workshop our ideas for polyamorous anarchist businesses, where can people find us?
So I was actually looking at my social media inboxes and the vast number that I haven't checked. And especially with this new job, I realized that I have about 30 to 40 inboxes spread out across work and personal and podcast that are not getting checked regularly. So my resolution is actually, instead of trying to get people to a social media that I am not checking, I'm going to try to clean up social media. So I'm going to direct people just to the website for now, and to Patreon.
Fair enough. Then you can find us at facingbackward.com, which is where you find all of our good stuff, or at our Patreon. It's patreon.com/facingbackward, where you can enable us to talk about anarchist ice cream shops and also, I guess, crime occasionally.
Yes, and Patreon also does have a free tier. So if you just want to get notified of the stuff that's coming out, you can also sign up for the free tier. And that is actually one of the more reliable ways to get to me right now until I deal with the absolute mess that is current social media and the attempted management of it. But I do have to give a special shout out to the folks who have donated to our Patreon at the shout out tier. You keep us making really dumb jokes about anarchist ice cream shops.
We love you for it. You are Jan Leonard, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCulloch, Karen Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William, Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Hrushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, and Anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sy, Gil, Leslie Ikuta, Trash Taste Enjoyer, John, Christopher, Harrison Reese, Robbie Martin McAvoy, Inoue Enrio's Ghostbusters, NihongoKaizen.com, Shimao Toshio's History of Japonesia podcast, A House Is a Perfectly Cromulent Mascot, The Fish I Catch Are Rhodes Scholars Compared to Samuel Alito, A Schmuck, and Everything Changed When the Fire Nation Attacked.
Until next time, if I see a Romanoff, it's on site.